Hi everybody, today I'm going to show you how I sculpted this little dragon. Let's get started.
So pretty much the beginning of any of these projects starts the same way, with a pile of sticks and twigs and pine cones. This particular stick really caught my eye because it sort of looks like it already has legs. So I gathered a few other sticks with some knobs and good texture and pine cones for scales. I've really been collecting this stuff for this project for months, and I'm really excited to get into it. So I use the same kind of wax every time I make small sculptures. This is a microcrystalline wax called Victory Brown, typically. It's very sticky and good for building, not as good for taking away. So it's not really a carving wax, it's more of a building wax. So the first thing I'm going to do is just trim up this original stick, the one that I'm really basing the model off of. And I've got all these other little pieces that I'm going to test for texture and just kind of see where it takes me. I didn't plan out this piece very much. I did a little bit of sketching in my sketchbook. I have a sort of a vague idea of what I want it to look like, but I'm going to really let the pieces of nature kind of dictate where I go with this. And as you can see, I'm kind of removing all of the legs, all of the branches as they normally would have been, and I'm changing the angles here, giving them a more rigid bend. I'm also gonna just kind of hold the limbs in place, and once I sort of get them where I want, I'm gonna tack them in place with some hot wax. And I tend to move them around a lot, so this is certainly not where this is gonna land forever, but it's a good way to kind of start and get an idea of the position, the posture that you want. You can always change it later. So I tend to get a little carried away with fingers and hands with sculptures like this, especially since I'm using sticks to make them, because there's so many little bends and angles in sticks naturally that kind of look already like hands and limbs and fingers. And with dragons especially, they have kind of a gnarly, knuckly sort of look to them. So I'm sort of exaggerating the bends that are already in the sticks, making them more pronounced and turning them into little claws. Sometimes I just use the sticky wax just to hold things in place, just to get an idea. It's not super permanent, but it works. And for the joints, you can see this wax is much harder. That is the hot wax that I'm using to fuse. That's definitely needed for joints, because if you're just using soft wax to hold joints in place, they're gonna fall all over the place, and it is infuriating. Trust me on this. So I'm just touching up all of my joints. I'm gonna have to do this 100 more times before the end of this process, but this is kind of how it goes. I tend to do a lot of things that get undone and redone a bunch of times because the angle's not quite right, position's not quite right, but it's all just a process of feeling it out and seeing where it goes. I can't stress that enough, that every little piece I put on here, I'm just doing because it feels like the right piece. It looks like it should belong there, not because I planned out every single piece, every little stick that I was going to use. I just really don't work like that. So I like having a big pile of pine cones, things nearby that if I feel like I'm stuck and I'm not finding the right piece, I can kind of dig through my pile of goodies and find the right stuff. I also use the softer wax as an armature, sort of underbelly structure a lot of the time, because I tend to put materials over the top of it, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like, but it adds a little bit of girth so that you're not just sticking a bunch of sticks over other sticks and other things and it just gets clunky. You need something under all of that, so I like to just kind of smush a bunch of wax up underneath just to give it a little bit of structure. Here I'm adding some larger pine cone pieces for the back because I wanted to give it kind of like a segmented body feel, like a really big insect or a lizard with just big armor scales on its back. That's sort of what I was going for, and The underside, here I'm just sculpting in some scales instead of adding them all one by one, mainly because I'm going to be holding it from the underside while I work on it, and I'm bound to crush any pieces that I put under there, so it's easier to just kind of mock in some simple scales into the wax that I'll touch up later on, and they won't be as tricky to mold either. But of course, I'm definitely setting myself up here for these molds to be very difficult to make. And I want to preface anybody trying to do this that this is the first step here that I'm showing you now, but the next step is molding. And all of these little scales, all these little bits and pieces, are really a bear to mold, and I think that's one of the reasons why you don't see stuff like this being made very often, because it really is a giant pain in the ass. But aside from being a pain in the ass, it is a lot of fun, and I highly recommend, if you are one of those people who likes to collect sticks and acorns and stuff, I suggest that you give it a shot. Just trying to make a little creature out of bits and pieces of things is really, really satisfying. I especially love sculpting little faces. As you see me working here on the dragon's face, I decided to use a piece of bark kind of as a jumping off point, sort of, and then, you know, kind of adding little pieces to it, breaking pieces to give him a more jagged jawline, and also utilizing this really spiky, kind of scary pine cone I found that actually is sort of like painful to hold because it's got these little barbs on it, but I thought they were perfect for a dragon's head. It's like he's got little armor on the top of his head. I thought they were really cute and kind of the perfect size and shape, so we're gonna just see how it goes, I guess. And no dragon is complete without some horns, so this stick I've actually been holding on for probably way too long, but it has like a zigzaggy kind of pattern to its growth, which I thought was kind of perfect for a dragon's typical top of the head, horns that go back, kind of in the ear area. I don't know, I'm probably going overboard with it, but whatever. We're gonna stick his head on and see how it looks. I'll likely take it off a few more times, but that's sort of how I work. I take pieces off, put them back on, move them around. When pieces need to be worked on, like here I'm working on his neck, I'm adding some angles that sort of will dictate which direction he's looking. I kind of am one of those people who has a little bit too much invested in like anatomical correctness, even though dragons aren't real, obviously. But I actually have sort of a lot of history in that field. I studied a lot of, at least human anatomy and muscle groups and bone structure and things like that. And obviously I'm very much invested in nature and animals and observing creatures that do exist, like lizards and crocodiles and things like that. So that's sort of where I pull those references from. When you see the head turned or the arm up and the muscle structure surrounding it, of course, dragons are not real, but they are based on creatures that are real in cultures that absolutely exist. Maybe there are dragons, I don't know, but I like to think if they exist that they would look something like this, and that the way my dragons move and bend, I like to think it's as realistic as it could be. Maybe I'm being optimistic here, but I like to create things that you can imagine coming to life. Which is why I add so many details, because of course if you've ever seen a lizard up close, they have a million teeny tiny little pieces, little tiny scales. There's just so much going on, they're so beautiful. So that's what I'm sort of going for with this guy, and I'm adding some wings, which of course they're highly unrealistic because they're made from maple leaves. And you can see me adding wax to the backside of them to make them a little sturdier, a little easier to mold, and also a little easier to cast. Leaves, as they typically are very, very thin and wouldn't hold up to the casting process. You'd end up with holes, or they would just be paper thin and they would bend or break, and we just don't want that. I also ended up giving him little ears made of leaves as well. I wasn't really planning on doing that, but like I said, I kind of just roll with it. And when I was cutting these leaves up, the little ends with all the little angles and curves were just so cute. I thought I would stick them on there. So this process has taken me so long that I burned through an entire wick in my alcohol lamp, which is why I had to replace it. And I get a lot of questions about these alcohol lamps because they're kind of cool looking and they look like kind of like archaic, but they're dirt cheap on the internet, and they're really handy because if you're like me and you work for hours and hours and hours without stopping, they burn for hours and hours and hours without stopping, which is nice, so highly recommend. So here I'm pretty much just finishing up little details, kind of positioning the wings, seeing where I want them, reinforcing some pieces with some extra wax on the underside. Anywhere where I feel like I might run into trouble with the molds, I put a little bit of extra wax, I seal seams or fill little holes, anything like that. It's kind of the last step in sculpting, is you need to make sure that your mold material isn't just gonna fill in every little crevice and make your item impossible to remove. And I've been there a few times, and it is so frustrating when you have a perfect little sculpture that you love and it is so embedded with wax and silicone that you are just ripping pieces of it out, and then later on your molds work horribly. And I will show you more of the mold making process later on, so stay tuned if you're curious about how that goes, because it ain't gonna be pretty. But for now, we got this beautiful little dragon out of all of this chaos, and thank you for watching.